Bienvenidas.
Bienvenidas, comadres, compadres, and friends to our July 2021 Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club Teleconference podcast. This is Karen Gonzalez, Book Club Coordinator for the Denver Las Comadres Book Club. We wish you and your familias health, safety, and love. We continue to pray for all affected by the pandemic and the families of the victims in the building collapse in Miami. Our July 2021 teleconference celebrates two of our comadre authors, Esmeralda Santiago and Patricia Engel. We will learn a little bit more about them in a few. First, a bit of history about our book club. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York at Comadre Maria Ferrar's apartment. After a hiatus, it was restarted in March 2007. Comadre Johanna Castillo, at the time national organizer of the book club and former Comadres board member, said, "We are launching the book club to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our writers. Now more than ever, we need to support our Latino authors. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city or time zone. We have clubs in 12 cities that are meeting virtually. There is sure to be one that can fit your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not help us start one? For more information about our book club, visit our website at latinolit.com. We started these teleconferences, Reading with Las Comadres, in October of 2006. We are in our 14th year of sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the Reading with Las Comadres teleconferences and book club in an effort to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and different perspectives on Latino cultures and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. So please invite others to join us. We are very grateful to the publishers Harper Perennial and Avid Reader Press for their support of this teleconference with free books. For more information about the authors and publishers, visit our website at latinolit.com. Our Book of the Month author, Esmeralda Santiago, will be interviewed by Julia Abrantes. Let's learn a little bit about Comadre Esmeralda. Esmeralda Santiago is the author of the memoirs When I Was Puerto Rican, Almost a Woman, which she adapted into a Peabody Award-winning film for PBS's Masterpiece Theater, and The Turkish Lover, the novel America's Dream, and a children's book, A Doll for Navidades. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and House and Garden, among other publications, and on NPR's All Things Considered and Morning Edition. Born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, she lives in New York. Our interviewer, Julia Abrantes, is the submissions coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, board member of Empowering Latino Futures, and a stalwart of Las Comadres for over 12 years. Comadre Julia, take it away.
Thank you, Comadre Karen. Bienvenidas, Comadre Esmeralda.
Hola, ¿cómo están todas ustedes?
Oh, we are so well, and we are really blessed by having you join us this evening. First of all, I want you to know, if you didn't already, that Reading America's Dream was the first time we've read one of the classic novels that we have chosen for our summer reading list. So, we were really honored that you're able to join us this evening and talk about it. So thank you again.
Thank you, and thank you so much for choosing my first novel, which I worked very, very hard on, and that I really still think about all the issues that come up in that particular story.
Yeah, I can imagine. I read this novel originally when it was published. I actually still have the hardcover amongst my library collection here, and I read it again recently because I wanted to read it with fresh eyes. And with a fresh heart, and someone who's lived 25 years and who maybe has gone through some of these experiences that the characters went through in the book. How have other readers reacted to having America's Dream re-released?
Oh, this is what an interesting question. Well, it's I think first of all, some people who were not familiar with the book thought
Mm-hmm.
that this was, my most recent novel. So they were surprised that it's been, this is on the 25th year.
Yeah.
And much of what when I wrote this novel, the Navy was still living in Vieques,
Mm-hmm.
and Vieques was a very different place. So right now, when you read that novel, it really is like a historical novel at this point. And so it's been really fascinating the way people respond to it, looking at it as something that is showing us what people lived and loved like at that time. So that was kind of a fascinating thing. I hadn't thought about it until one of my readers wrote to me and said, this is part of our history now.
Yeah.
So that was fascinating. And I constantly get, just randomly, when least expected, I'll get an email or a message through my social media from somebody who has come to the book through many different ways. They found it somewhere, or their titi gave it to them, or their daughter is reading it in a college course or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things that happen to América are still happening to so many of our mujeres. So, so it's very poignant for me that,
Yeah.
you kind of expect 25 years later much more would have changed, and yet, some things take a lot longer than we hope for. So it's a combination for me of the excitement of knowing when they first encounter the book and have an emotional reaction to it, and then there's that other part of it going like, wow, still todavía.
Yeah. It was kind of amazing to me. Not amazing because I read it, and we've lived through this time, and then coming into today, 2021, and so many of these situations and so many of these things still ring true.
Yeah.
From the beauty, and then from the sadness, all the
Yeah.
different aspects of it. So there's a lot of different parts of the story, and I want to see if I can cover a few of them at least in our time. The one thing that you talk about, and that I see again, and my eyes like really opened, was the cycle of what what America's mother went through, América, and then with her daughter running away at 14. And I don't think I thought about it as much back then as I did today, when reading the book and thinking in my circles, of people, how many have that cycle that continues, or that, don't break it. How do you feel about that, when you think about that now?
Right. Well, it's, I have to admit that when I wrote America's Dream, my daughter was a little girl.
Okay.
And so I have to say that when we passed that age in which Rosalinda is in this novel, I was really looking at her very closely, because when you're in that those early teenage years, when your body is changing, you're maturing from childhood into womanhood in many different ways, physically and emotionally and hormonally. So all those things, of course, are that's it. That's what's still happening. But on the other hand, there's so much of these cycles of poverty and violence and people not getting enough education so that they can make better decisions. Those things are still part of our lives, not just us in Puerto Rico, pero this is all over the world. And so I, as a writer, I want to show the world the way I see it. And in the case of América and her family, her mother and her daughter, and then her friends and whatever, I was really trying to bring what, to me, was the truth of the reality that I was seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is why I think it seems like it's pretty much the same as 25 years ago, because I was really trying to bring us real people.
Yeah.
On the other hand, real people continue to make mistakes, even if if time has passed, and so it's very poignant for me. I had hoped, that you would not have 14-year-old girls feeling so disconnected to their mother that they would want to, leave her.
Right.
Those kinds of things are painful as a mother. And as a titi, I have many nieces who, when they get to that age, it gets really tricky for every other mujer in the family to be a support if you can, and being there for them. And then there are situations in which those people don't exist for those young women, and that's the sad part for me, is that when they most need us,
right,
sometimes we're just not there.
Yeah. And I mean, the other part is that even when they need you, they don't accept the help.
Yes.
They push you away, which is the saddest part. I know of
Right.
a family, and the mother, her 15, her daughter was 15 years old, ran away, with a boy in Mani, in Puerto Rico, just
Mm-hmm.
ran away with him. And then the mother said, no, you're going to get married. So they got married. And then her daughter had a baby while she was still 15 years old, and the mother also happened to be pregnant. So they gave birth with her youngest daughter, and her granddaughter were born within a month of each other.
Wow.
Her first grandchild. And then the daughter's second daughter did the same thing, ran away at 15, got pregnant, and then her son ran away at 16, got somebody pregnant. It's just like the cycle. It's something I didn't think about back then. And it's like, they're all Puerto Rican, so it's not like they were dealing with, everything else on top of it, being like the empleadas who came here, with no papers. But I'm jumping ahead.
Well, I think the thing that is so interesting is that that age is so it's just such a tender time, because I think, especially, I'm speaking about girls particularly, because this is one of the main characters in America's Dream is this young girl, and I think it's even harder now, I think, because kids grow up so much faster.
Correct.
Even 25 years ago, there was no Twitter, there was no social media, there wasn't that same kind of pressure. There was a lot of pressure, but the pressure was different, and it wasn't quite so public as it was then. And so I think it's very I really feel for mothers now who have teenage girls, and how difficult it was to reach them when you didn't have all the other pressures. But now, on top of that, the peer pressure that's coming in is making things even harder. And of course, they, at that age, they focus on their friendships and their peer groups, not realizing that in another 5 years, most of those people will not be in their lives.
Correct.
And you tell them that, and they don't believe it.
Right. It's very true and very sad.
It is.
One of the key parts of this story is talking about America and Correa's relationship, and that cycle of abuse, where women just stay in that cycle, that continued cycle of abuse. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I actually, one of the reasons I wrote America's Dream is because I had so many years experience working in the field of domestic violence and prevention. And I really had an opportunity to speak to many women in this situation, and also trying to find ways to help them out of that situation. So that's how the book came, from my own experience with these women. And one of the things that at the time, and of course still, is that, you know, domestic violence is a cycle, and that it's like it goes from parent to child, to that child becoming a parent, to then the next, you know, and it really is generational. And when the only way that will stop is for there to be a break in that in that cycle, and there's a lot of pressure within families sometimes. If there's violence, there's a lot of secrets that are, you know, a part of it. There's also a lot of it. Some of it is cultural. The expectation of how women's relationship should be to men and men towards women. So those kinds of things complicate the situation. So that even in some cultural, if you're in a different culture from yours, and you try to explain domestic violence is not something that is good for you, and it's not, you know, you don't have to live with that.
Correct.
They have to overcome a lot of internal pressure that they have been receiving for many, many years from their culture, from, you know, their family, from the media. I mean, women are objects, you know, and so all those, it's very, very difficult to place yourself into that situation if you're not in it. And then when you get out of a situation like that, what happens is that people think that you're special in some way, and so that some of these women in that situation will say, well, I know you did it, but I can't, you know. Right. And the fact is, you can, but you do need a lot of support. And, you know, sometimes they don't get it. They don't get it. They don't get the support, or their relationship is just so ingrained in the family culture that it means sometimes you have to leave your family, and who wants to do that, you know?
Right. So hard. But let's talk a little bit more about the story. So América is in this tumultuous relationship with Correa, the love-hate, you know, where they go through their cycles, you know, where he's wonderful to her, bringing her all kinds of presents, and then he's, you know, chasing her down for working 5 minutes overtime, or, you know, too late.
Right.
Or, and then her relationship with her mother and her daughter, and her finally being given the opportunity to escape, which is a wonderful thing. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes, this is, again, I had spent a lot of time in Vieques, and so talked to, you know, wherever I went, of course, I got to talk to some of the women who live there, and many of them, their mothers or their sisters or their friends had left the island. They had left the island of Vieques, some of them for the Big Island, for Puerto Rico, and some of them further. And so it becomes, when I'm beginning to think about América, I think, well, she needs to get away, not just from this relationship that she can't, because the island is very, very small. There's not very many places she can go to. She has to get away in a way that he can't follow. And so she does have this opportunity to come to the United States and work with a family that needed a nanny and housekeeper. services. And so she thought, this is my chance, I can do this, But, one of the things that happens to her, of course, is that there's a big gap between her culture and the culture she finds herself in all of a sudden, in addition to language, in addition to climate, in addition to the physical environment. She's in this campo in upstate New York, as opposed to growing in a small island in Puerto Rico. So all these, she did not count on all those changes. She didn't really think about them, and all of a sudden she has to deal with them. And her escape from all this confusion and the things that were going on is she goes to her family in the Bronx, who are able to remind her of what it's like to have arroz con habichuelas con sofrito,
Exactly.
So, that to have your culture, it's so important for her to have her culture, a backup from everything that's going on. And then learning to meet, as she begins to meet some of the other empleadas, she realizes, wow, I have felt so isolated in my situation of domestic violence, and my daughter, my issues with my mother, my issues with my daughter, my issues with my entire life. But she realizes that she is not alone in this, and this is a moment for her, because she really hasn't had any friends. But all of a sudden, I think, to hear some of these other experiences, I think there's a certain comfort to it, where she can actually think for herself. I can do something about this situation because I am not alone in it.
Right. So two things that I want to touch on in that, where you talk about the empleadas. So when America finally does get to New York, and she's in upstate, or I should say outside of the city limits. For a city girl like me, that's upstate. Anything, as soon as you cross over the bridge, you're upstate. So she's up in Westchester County, and so it's a different life for her, where at night, now I live outside of the city. Now I live in a town outside of downtown Atlanta. And so for me, my sounds at night are, the grasshoppers and, the tree frogs, which sound very much like a cookie sometimes. And, versus the sirens and the fire engines and, all those city sounds. So, that was like a rude awakening to her. A different, that certainly put her in a different place. And, of course, the food and the culture. And I loved how she snuck in the Spanish food, the Puerto Rican meals to the kids, and, the asopao and the this and the that.
Right, little by little.
Little by little. I'm going to give you a special surprise in my room, That always works for me with my grandma. When I looked at something and I was like, no. She was like, no, pero cómelo ahorita. And then, she had the little jar on top of the fridge with the candies that I would get to pick from afterwards. And now I love that palate, as my stomach surely attests. But, those little things. And when she finally got to her family in the Bronx and, being a part of that culture and the Sunday dinners and all that kind of stuff, and seeing a family that, as dysfunctional as it was, it actually functioned, pretty well when it came to those Sunday dinners. And, we all talk about our dysfunctional families, and, I'm sure many of us, we have our quirks and everything, but there are other times where it just runs so beautifully. So that was a good thing to see. But getting back to Westchester, when she's in Westchester, the other empleadas that she meets on the playground and in the markets, they are invisible. Nobody pays attention to them. Nobody wants to communicate with them, which sadly is still happening today.
Yes, it's this is really true, and that part of it actually comes from my very own experience. I live in Westchester, and when my kids were little, I would bring them to the playground, and it turns out that the only other women there were empleadas, and so at first they thought I was an empleada, that, and I would say, no, these are my kids, and the fact that I could speak Spanish to them, and it was very, again, there's a lot of poignancy in these interactions that both America had and that I had, because I had the exact same experience when I came up here into the suburbs, and I noticed that I was invisible also, and that wherever I went, I was asked, where are you from, and all kinds of things that you are trying to understand why is that an issue for people, But in the case of these women, particularly, they are supposed to be invisible. They're supposed to run these big mansions quite often, and they not only are they supposed to be invisible, they rarely get the credit for maintaining these places for people who, maybe they worked in the city, or maybe they didn't, whatever. But they don't really get the respect that I think they deserve for the work that they do. And I really wanted to bring that to attention to my readers. Many women in my family have worked in domestic work. I didn't, because I really am a terrible domestic worker in my own house. But what my husband said when I was Puerto Rican when he read America's Dream, he says, "Oh, so you know how to do all this stuff that America does." I'm going to say, well, I know what needs to be done. I just don't like to do it, But a lot of these women actually, they take a great deal of pride in the work that they do, and I just think that they deserve to get more respect and just every once in a while a compliment, because they're really making our lives easier.
When I got the new version with the introduction written by you, what stuck out at me was the last two lines there, or three lines actually, where you say, "We, the descendants of patriarchal and colonizing societies, carry our histories as burdens, unobtrusive to others, but to us as familiar as our own shadows. Like America, some of us are unaware just how deeply we've been shaped by those forces. I struggle with it daily, but have dedicated myself to making our lives visible, and in the process ask you, dear reader, to see us." That, I read that, and I was just like, whew, I just needed to stop. It was the first 2 pages, but I needed to stop.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was amazing, my editor, who was in charge of the reissue, Emma Cooper, she suggested that I do a little introduction, and I just didn't. It took me a while to figure out what I would want to say, and then I said, I have to say something that I've been wanting to say for a long time, and that is for readers to when you read a book, it's not just it's not only entertainment. I think for those of us who are literary novelists, where we do want to entertain you, of course, but we also want to bring you information, and we want to bring you some sense of our humanity, of the humanity of the people that we write about, that we create. Some of them people are based on people we know, some of us completely invented. But our goal is to make a point, because writing is really hard to do. And if there's no point to it, to you as a writer, there would be no point to the reader. And so I really wanted to remind when people start reading America's Dream, to have a sense of what it's like for a Puerto Rican person to have the history of that we carry, 500 years of being colonized by one country or another, under different names, of course. But I think that it affects everything in your life, whether you're aware of it the way that, say, revolutionaries are, or you're just working through your day to make sure that that you provide for yourself and for your loved ones. But you still are affected by your history, and I wanted to make sure that my readers would go into this book knowing that this was the intention. This is the intention of my work as a writer, is to bring this kind of mirror so you could look at yourself and say, oh yeah, these characters carry this history. I may not be from the same culture, but I carry my history.
Correct.
And we need to recognize what that does to us.
Yeah, it was very beautiful, and a couple of our readers listened to the book, and they were, I guess, floored when they heard your voice coming out there, because not many authors read their own works. So hearing your voice behind the story, behind the words that you wrote, all those years ago, was something that they really felt moved on.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it means a lot to me that when I hear from my readers, I mean, we writers, we basically work by ourselves in our little areas, in our little rooms, or our little corners in our bedrooms, or wherever we happen to do our work, and it's pretty much us and our tools, whether we do it by pen, pencil, notebook, or computer, or dictated, or however the tool is. But it's just really, it's a constant, this is our challenge, is how to use our tools to bring these stories to you, the reader.
Yeah.
We never meet you, we don't know who you are.
Right.
But you know a lot more about us by the words that we write and the stories that we put out there. And I really do hope that my readers understand who I am, based on the work that I put out there, because it really is it is a part of me that is being presented to a bunch of strangers, essentially, hoping to have a conversation, even though we're not in the same room and not at the same time.
Yeah, it definitely it came across, and we heard nothing but wonderful comments from our readers who gave us comments. And finally, one last thing, while I was doing some background on the on America's Dream, I noticed that there was actually a movie made.
Yes.
That's that I didn't know about, and I can't wait to sit down and watch it. But the movie is called América, and I saw that it's available.
Called América.
On Amazon.
Yes, it is available. It was actually the film. It was filmed in Puerto Rico, in Vieques, and the Bronx, and Westchester. And the actress Limari is a Puerto Rican. I think she was a Miss Universe or something like that, and then she's become an actress, and so she plays América in a very affecting and emotional way. And it's the film is co-produced by Edward James Olmos, who she's married to, and they love the story. And Sonia Fritz, who is a filmmaker who lives in Puerto Rico and has really trained a whole generation of Puerto Rican cineastas, the filmmakers. She was the director, and she's the person who kind of made this film happen, because it was her idea to take the book and make it into a film. So I do hope that people, if they see it, that they will reach out to me. I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter occasionally, and and I do like to. I really do love to hear from my readers.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, we'll make sure that we let them know that. And my final question will be, what can we expect next from you?
Well, right now I'm working on deadline. A novel that is contemporary, and it's really interesting that, I began writing these novels, and they are contemporary in the sense that what it's happening at the time that I'm writing it, but of course by the time that they're published, it's years later.
Yeah.
So this is I can't tell you very much else about it except that it will be published by Knopf probably next year. There's no actual date yet because I have not delivered my final manuscript, but I'm doing my best to meet my deadline and make sure that the book is out next year at some point.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Comadre Esmeralda, for spending time with us this evening, for sharing this work with us, not only 25 years ago, but today. So much of it still rings true, and we look forward to reading your next novel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to reach out to you and to our comadres and friends and my readers. It's been a wonderful experience, and thank you for your great questions.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. Comadre Karen?
Yes. Our additional conversations with author is Patricia Engel. Let's learn a little bit about Patricia. Patricia Engel is the author of Infinite Country, a New York Times bestseller, Reese's Book Club pick, Esquire Book Club, and Book of the Month Club pick, Indie Next pick, Amazon Best Book of the Month, and more. Her other books include The Veins of the Ocean, winner of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, It's Not Love, It's Just Paris, winner of the International Latino Book Award, and Vida, a finalist for the PEN Hemingway and Young Lions Fiction Awards. New York Times notable book and winner of Colombia's National Book Award, the Premio Biblioteca de Narrativa Colombiana. She is the recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. Her stories appear in the Best American Short Stories, the Best American Mystery Stories, the O. Henry Prize Stories, and elsewhere. Born to Colombian parents, Patricia teaches creative writing at the University of Miami. Our interviewer is Tess Tobin. Tess Tobin has been a proud member of Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club since 2008. She loves to read, and as the new membership liaison coordinator, enjoys promoting the book club's mission to connect readers everywhere through Latinx culture and literature. Tess Tobin worked as the Personnel and Administrative Services Librarian at New York City College of Technology, the City University of New York, retiring in 2017. Tess has dedicated much of her professional career to Reforma, the National Association to Promote Library and Information Services to Latinos and the Spanish-speaking, serving as its president from 2017 to 2018. Comadre Tess, take it away.
Bienvenida, Patricia.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you this evening. I had such a great time listening to the last conversation.
Yes. Very nice. Thank you for coming back. I know the Las Comadres Book Club enjoyed reading one of your previous novels, It's Not Love, It's Just Paris, which I remember we enjoyed very much. So thank you very much for coming back. And let's talk a little bit about Infinite Country. I know this is your fourth novel, and you have touched on the themes of migration and the diaspora. So what were the seeds behind you writing Infinite Country?
Well, yes, Infinite Country is my fourth book, but all my books have explored immigration and diaspora in different ways. Usually they were first-person narrators, so you really got deeper into the experience of one particular character and going deep into their psyche and their interior life. With Infinite Country, I wanted to write a novel that spoke to the collective experience of a family in the process of emigrating. I wanted to be able to show what that is like in the active process. You know, a lot of us in diaspora are still living our immigration story, have it very present, but for others, it's already in the past. They've settled into this new life in the United States. So I wanted to show where it's very much in the present, on the forefront, and really is affecting everyday life. So speaking to that collective decision made by the parents to bring the family from one country into the other, but I wanted to be able to tell it in a way that also spoke to the individual and private experiences of each of those family members, so that you could see how different family members who are living in a way the same experience are all having very different private experiences, and there are things that they don't even share with one another. So that was the idea that really guided me through the writing of the novel, and so that's what I tried to do.
Great. How were you able to write so deeply about the undocumented experience? Have you met many people like that in your community?
Yes, I'm raised by immigrants, and I've always lived in immigrant communities. I've had, very, very close relationships of loved ones whose lives have been challenged by their documentation and their status in this way. And it's really, the story of the family in Infinite Country is such a typical one. It's not one that, I had to reach very far to invent, because the circumstances in the novel are circumstances that I've seen experienced up close by so many people close to me. So what I wanted to do was write about that, because it's not something that I really saw portrayed in a novel. My family roots are Colombian, and the Colombian diaspora is one of the largest diasporas in the world. Yet you would not know that by what is available in literature. And of course, that's something that I realized as a young reader, and that's also why, as a writer, it's my mission to write toward that void. So that my community, the people that I care about, the people that I most admire, the people who are my heroes and my role models, actually exist on the page.
Right, that was great. I mean, that you were able to write about that experience. The plot stretches over about 20 years, and the novel is relatively short. Was that a choice? I mean, I know we really developed the character of Talia, and we learn about the rest of the family, but you could have, perhaps gone on further, but was it a choice to just have it as concise as it was? I mean, it told a very interesting story, but I was just curious, our readers wanted to know the style, how you chose that style of, the characters being narrated in different areas of the book.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in writing, everything is a choice, word by word. It's just a series of choices that a writer makes in order to make their stories. So it was something that I set out to do for myself. I wanted to write a novel that was lean, compact, that felt very urgent and very intimate, but that still somehow had a wide epic scope to it. As you said, it covers about 20 or so years. It covers different countries, different characters at different moments in time. So I wanted to cover this vast terrain, but still be able to do it in a way that felt very personal, very private, like you're sitting down to have a conversation with somebody, and they're just, one of those conversations where they're just telling you something really important to them, and you're just locked into it. So it's a different kind of experience. It's a different kind of book. My last book before Infinite Country is The Veins of the Ocean, and that book is 400 pages. It's twice the size of Infinite Country.
Right.
And it's a different experience. Some books call for that. Some books, are more immersive, contemplative experiences, and you kind of have to decide what the DNA of your story is and how you're going to execute it. So when I started to discover the story, the bones of the story that I wanted to write for Infinite Country, I knew that the way that I wanted to tell it was in a very slim way, where there was no real rumination or, that where you were really just locked into the moment as you read it.
Right, and their lives are so fragmented, and that's almost how you develop the story in parts. I think it was very reflective of what was going on in their life. You also, you talk a lot about Colombia, the urban experience in Bogota, and it appeared like it was not appeared. It was obviously very violent during that time period. Did your parents protect you from that history as a child? I mean, what would they tell you about Colombia when they would talk to you about it?
Well, Bogota, where a lot of Infinite Country is set, is my mother's hometown, and my mother's entire family is still
Right.
there. So even though I grew up in the United States, my father's family is in Medellin. So much of my family was in Colombia that while we lived very far away from this violence, we were still very connected to it by our family who remained there, and their lives were touched by it constantly in different ways. So that's a very specific experience to being Colombian in diaspora. Like I said, there's 5 million Colombians living outside of Colombia, and does that make them any less Colombian because they're living abroad? When the pain of violence and the reverberations of violence and how that affects society and how it affects how people are able to move about their lives and what they're exposed to, the risks, that's something that affects so many people, whether you're near or you're far away from them. So my parents, it's not like when I grew up, it was not quite yet the 24-hour news cycle, and of course there was no social media, so the news dumps we got were more limited, but it was still very personal and something that my parents were affected by, and as their children, we were affected by it too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Were you able to travel back and forth when you were a child, or that was
Yeah, we did. I mean, there were years when we didn't because things were, a bit more tense over there, and there were years when my family from Colombia came to visit us instead. But yeah, we did visit.
Yeah. Okay. You also have a lot of descriptive passages about the Andean landscape and folklore and mythology. What's the importance of Moro telling these stories to Talia? What was your reason for adding this to your book?
Well, in the case of immigration, very often the only thing that people really take with them are their stories. And the only ways that you can hold on to them is by telling them over and over and over. Those stories are quickly lost, because people don't share them and don't repeat them, or maybe from one generation to the next, the younger generation is not so interested in hearing them. I would say those stories are lost just as, or even quicker than language is lost. I mean, we know how hard it is to hold on to language in diaspora, right?
Right.
So those stories, which are so specific to that land, to the land around what is now Bogota, are really important to Mauro, and it's something that he knows is going to be very quickly lost. And they're also stories that explain so much of how he sees himself and what he feels is his role in the world. And those are stories, they're origin stories that explain, how the human species fits in with other species and what we're doing here on Earth and what happens to us after. And these are stories that different cultures have to explain different things in different ways. But that's his story, right? Those are the stories that belong to him and that belong to his children, and those are things that he wants to make sure that he can pass on to them.
Right. Yes, I know they were a good part of the story. One of our readers wants to know if your parents are still alive.
Yes, they are. I'm very much alive.
Okay, that's great. What did they think of the book?
Well, they're my parents, so they love it. They're very supportive of my work, and they always love reading my books. They don't read them. Actually, my mom read a draft of it early on, but my father didn't read it until it was, we had hard copies already.
Oh yeah. Did he like? I'm sure he liked it. But I mean, did they comment on the way you portrayed Bogota or anything like that? They had from their own memory.
Like I said, Bogota is my mom's hometown, so that's one of the reasons I asked her to read it early on.
Right.
You know, I've been in Bogota many times, and you know, I know it well enough. But my mom is of course a native, so that's why I wanted her to let me know if I got it right or not. So it did pass my mom's approval early on.
Very good. Oh, that's great. Okay, so let's see. Was this book written first in English? I know it hasn't come out yet in Spanish, but are your other books written first in Spanish and then translated, or what was the process for those books?
No, all my books were first written in English, and then they were translated. In the case of Vida and The Veins of the Ocean, I worked very closely on those translations. So, you know, I'm very happy with them, and we worked very hard on them. But they're all my books are first written in English. I do write in Spanish, but normally in Spanish I write, you know, shorter pieces like essays and things like that. You know, when magazines in Latin America ask me to write something and stuff.
Is Infinite Country due to come out in Spanish?
Hopefully soon, but I don't have specific details yet.
Okay. Is that always a challenge when you write to have the Spanish edition come out at the same time?
Yeah, you know, the thing is that publishing markets in other countries don't really have the budgets or the means like the United States publishing industry does. So sometimes they're running behind, they're running slower, they have fewer resources, and of course everybody has been hit very hard by COVID.
Right. And you received your Guggenheim Fellowship during the pandemic. How did that?
No, I received it the year before.
Oh, good. So you were able to get started on a new project?
Well, no, I received the Guggenheim for the book that became Infinite Country.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I received the Guggenheim in 2019, and it was for what is now Infinite Country.
Oh, great. I'm glad the time frame worked out because things were so difficult. What else can you tell us about this story that resonates most with you, with the characters? About writing it and developing. One of the characters that I found interesting, and it's only short, is Agujo is his name?
Aguja.
The motorcycle? Aguja.
Yeah.
I mean, how did he come about? And I mean, he was very protective of Talia, I thought. I mean, terrible things could have happened, but there was that bit of hope there with him, you know, just taking her along and actually bringing her home. How did his character get in the story?
Well, you know, it's not unlike what you just said. Sometimes situations that look to be dangerous are actually turned out to be ones that save you and protect you. And sometimes situations where you think that you're safe and you'll be protected turn out to be the most dangerous ones. You know? So in the case of Aguja, he is like many young men who I have known in Colombia. So he is, you know, his inspiration came from lots of different people that I've known, but also his, you know, his sort of sense of self as a person who recognizes the flaws in his country but still has such a deep love for it, and how he expresses that to Talia is also very typical, very common, and the way that he speaks about immigration, like he has no interest in it whatsoever, is also very common. But it's precisely that paradox, you know, that people make assumptions like, wow, this is going to be dangerous, he's going to hurt her, and it's not the case. Whereas, you know, you have a situation like what happened to her mother, you know, in the United States, in a place where you'd never expect it, where she's been, you know, brutalized at the hands of somebody that you would never suspect, you know.
Right. And you kind of wonder, about the migration experience, knowing that you want to leave to have a better life, but yet to actually get up and do it. It must be a very hard decision.
Yeah, I that was another thing that I really wanted to explore with Infinite Country, is that a lot of times people, because of the media portrayals of it, think that the decision to migrate is an easy one. Like everyone is just dying to come to the United States, and that once you get here, you're just happy to be here. You never look back. And in reality, at least in my experience and the people that I've known, it's a much more complicated experience, and it's often full of doubt and regret and sadness and profound homesickness, wondering if you made the right choice, wondering if you should just go back or if you should have just stayed home, because it's really hard here and it's really painful, and it's a constant weighing of the decisions and not always being sure about it. And this, by the same token, there are a lot of people who have no interest in migrating.
Right.
And that was important for me to explore as well.
Right. Okay. I was just going to ask you a question, and it went right out of my little head. So talking about Talia, then, was there a certain amount of innocence on her and Maura's part? Would you call it innocence for them to just? Well, they were a couple, and they were sleeping together, and she gets pregnant, and then they get
married. Elena and Mauro.
Oh, Elena. I'm sorry. Yes, Elena. Do you think of them just leaving and hoping for the best? Is
well,
what?
The way it begins, Elena is one of those people who has no interest in moving abroad. Her life is pretty settled. She lives with her mother. They have a business. They have a home, and then she meets Mauro, and he, because of his own life experience, is much more restless and wants to go abroad. And they get tourist visas. And tourist visas are a very typical way for people to, arrive in other countries. Sometimes people think everything as related to immigrants is done in a way that's not legal or something, and that's really not the case. They get tourist visas, and what they decide to do, as their life changes, is they decide to simply overstay, which is also very common. It's very typical. But from the outset, they don't see themselves as immigrants. It's not their plan to go there and to settle. It's really just what a lot of people do. They just go to check it out and see what's out there. And then they decide to stay a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And as time works, sometimes it moves a little bit more quickly than you realize, and time passes and life happens and changes, and you either make choices or you don't make choices. But no matter what, there's consequences. And before you know it, you've lived a whole other life in another country.
Right. How did you decide on the ending of the book, of them actually reuniting? Was there a feeling of hope that you wanted to, because they were still on documents.
A lot of people have asked me about the ending, and it's always interesting to me how people read it differently. Different people read it differently. Some people say, oh, well, like that would never happen. And that's not true, because I actually know a lot of people who've had that happen. Sometimes families that have been separated for very long periods do get to be reunited. It's not always certain how long their reunion will last. And I think that what I wanted to show is an ending that is earned, that they've certainly earned that moment, but also show the tentativeness of it, and that they're having this moment. They're reunited for the moment, for now, for the present. But because of the complications of their legal statuses, you don't know how long that moment is going to last, and you also know that the next day their luck could turn in a very painful way, and they could be split apart again, and even worse than before. And that's
Right.
just the nature of those types of circumstances. But certainly, the fact that they were able to find their way to one another is something that they all hoped and worked for, and I saw it as entirely possible.
Right. Great. My last question. Thank you. My last question is: are you working on something new, or what's coming next?
Yeah, actually, I have a book coming out next year in fall of 2022, which is going to be a short story collection. So that's already on the way. The paperback of Infinite Country will be out this October in just a few months, but the story collection will be out next year, and then I'm in the very, very, very early stages of another novel that I hope will be ready for readers in the not-too-distant future.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We're very happy that you wrote this book. I think it's very timely with all the immigration policy, and also, as you said, to talk about the Colombian American experience. So thank you, Comadre Patricia, for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and thank you to all the readers and listeners. I'm so happy to be with you this evening.
Okay.
Buenas noches.
Yes, Comadres, Esmeralda, Patricia, Julia, and Tess, we are so grateful for the insightful interview and for spending time with us this evening. We enjoyed the sharing of perspectives and insights from your work and your life. We treasured the opportunity to learn about you, and we feel more connected to you. Once again, we thank Harper Perennial and Avid Reader Press for their support of this teleconference and for their generous gift of books for winners of early registration. We thank our audience for taking the time to join us for this teleconference, and thank you for those that submitted questions. And we'd like to thank Comadre Maria Ferrar for the media coordination and the Twitter chat, and to Comadre Dora Abreu for the web work she does for us. Without this volunteer leadership team, this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Mil gracias. Please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, etc. Those reviews carry weight with the publishers as well as other readers. Buy books to support our authors, and if your library does not have a book you want to read, ask them to order it. And please attend your virtual local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. Remember, it's open to everyone, men and women, and not just Latinos. We have 2 wonderful reads coming for you in August. The titles will be released in the next day or 2. Our teleconference for August will be held on Monday, August 30, 2021. Once again, we are keeping you all in our thoughts and prayers through these times. Thank you for your continued support of our book club and Latino literature. Mil gracias to all. Stay safe and wear your mask. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.